What happens when a late-night interview goes from friendly banter to explosive confrontation in a matter of minutes? What happens when one question crosses a line so severe that a legendary filmmaker walks off set? Tonight, we're breaking down the shocking moment that has everyone talking, the interview that ended before it even really began, and the accusation that changed everything. But before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about what went down, because this one is going to have people picking sides. The studio lights were hot, the audience was buzzing with energy, and Andy Cohen was in his element. This was supposed to be a fun, light-hearted conversation. Judd Apatow, the mastermind behind some of the biggest comedies of the past 2 decades, settled into the guest chair with his usual relaxed demeanor. The audience applauded as Andy shuffled his signature stack of blue cards, that mischievous smile already forming on his face. "Judd Apatow, welcome to the show," Andy said, his voice carrying that familiar mix of enthusiasm and playfulness. "It is so good to have you here. I mean, you've created some of the most iconic comedies, you've launched careers, you've made us laugh until we cried. How does it feel to basically be the godfather of modern comedy?" Judd laughed, a genuine warm sound that filled the studio. "Well, I don't know about godfather. That makes it sound like I'm going to make people offers they can't refuse. I try to tell stories that feel real, that capture something true about how people actually talk and behave. But that's the thing." Andy leaned forward, clearly excited. "Your movies, they changed comedy. Before you, we didn't have that raw, improvisational, let-it-breathe kind of style. You gave us the 40-year-old virgin, knocked up superbad I mean, come on. You've basically defined a generation of comedy." "I've been really lucky to work with incredibly talented people," Judd replied, his tone modest but confident. "I mean, Steve Carell, Seth Rogen, Kristen Wiig, Amy Schumer, these are people who would have succeeded with or without me. I just happened to be there to capture what they do best." Andy nodded enthusiastically. "And you're also known for being, let's say, very vocal on social media. You don't hold back. You share your opinions. You get into debates. You're not afraid to say what you think." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Judd's expression. It was subtle, just a slight tightening around his eyes, but it was there. "I think it's important to use whatever platform you have to speak up about things that matter." "Yeah, right." "Absolutely," Andy said, and there was a glint in his eye now, something that suggested he was about to pivot. "But here's what I find interesting, and I want to get your take on this, because I think it's fascinating. You've been very critical of certain people in the industry, very outspoken about behavior you find problematic, and I respect that. I really do. But there's been some talk, some whispers really, about your own behavior on set." The studio suddenly felt different. The energy changed. Judd's smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. "What kind of talk?" Well, Andy glanced down at his cards, but it felt performative, like he knew exactly what he was going to say and was just building the moment. "I've heard from a few people, and these are people who've worked with you, that you can be, let's call it, intense. That the collaborative environment you talk about publicly isn't always what people experience privately." Judd shifted in his seat. "I mean, I'm passionate about the work. I care deeply about getting it right. But I've always tried to create an environment where people feel safe to take risks, to be vulnerable, to try things." Sure, Andy said, but his tone had an edge now. "But passionate is one thing. What I'm talking about is something else. I'm talking about yelling, about making people feel small, about creating an atmosphere where cast and crew are walking on eggshells because they're afraid of setting you off." The audience had gone quiet. This wasn't the playful ribbing they'd expected. This was something else entirely. "Andy, I don't know what you're referring to specifically," Judd said, and his voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "But if someone has a problem with how I've conducted myself, they should come to me directly. I've always been open to feedback, always tried to be better." "That's the thing, though," Andy continued, and now he was fully committed to this line of questioning. "People don't feel like they can come to you. That's what I'm hearing. They feel like there's this power dynamic, this fear of retaliation, of being frozen out of future projects if they speak up." "That's not true," Judd said flatly. "I've worked with many of the same people over and over again precisely because we have good relationships, because they want to work with me and I want to work with them." Andy leaned back, crossing his legs. Okay, but let me ask you this. Do you think it's possible that your perception of these relationships is different from theirs? That may be what feels like passionate collaboration to you feels like something more uncomfortable to them. I think, Judd said slowly, carefully, that making a movie or a television show is inherently stressful. There are long hours, there's a lot of money at stake, there are creative disagreements. That's the nature of the business. But I have never intentionally made someone feel unsafe or disrespected. Intentionally, Andy repeated, seizing on the word. So you acknowledge that impact matters more than intent. Of course, impact matters, Judd said, but you're painting a picture here that I'm some kind of tyrant, and that's just not accurate. You're taking vague secondhand information and presenting it like it's fact. I'm not saying you're a tyrant, Andy said, but his body language suggested he wasn't backing down. I'm saying there's a disconnect between your public persona as this champion of authentic collaborative comedy and what some people have experienced working with you. Some people, Judd repeated, who give me names, give me specific incidents. Because right now, you're making serious implications about my character based on anonymous whispers. Andy smiled, but it wasn't friendly anymore. You know, I can't reveal my sources, Judd. Come on. You've been in this business long enough to know how this works. What I know, Judd said, his voice rising slightly, is that you invited me here under the pretense of a normal interview and you're ambushing me? With unsubstantiated allegations? This isn't journalism, Andy. This is gossip. It's not gossip if multiple people are saying the same thing, Andy shot back. And look, I'm giving you the opportunity to address this, to tell your side. That's more than fair. My side of what? Judd's frustration was evident now. You haven't actually accused me of anything specific. You're just throwing out these vague insinuations and expecting me to defend myself against shadows. The tension in the studio was palpable. Some audience members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This had gone far beyond the usual playful confrontation that Andy was known for. Okay, let me be specific then, Andy said, and there was something almost triumphant in his voice now. I spoke to someone who worked on one of your films. I'm not going to say which one. And they told me that you once screamed at an actress until she cried because she couldn't deliver a line the way you wanted it. They said you called her unprofessional, said she was wasting everyone's time, and that she was so shaken up she could barely continue shooting that day. What do you say to that? Judd stared at Andy for a long moment. That never happened. So this person is lying. I'm saying that never happened, Judd repeated. I have never screamed at an actress until she cried. Never. And the fact that you would sit here and say that to me, on camera, based on one anonymous source, is frankly shocking. Why would someone make that up? Andy pressed. What do they have to gain? I don't know, Andy. Why would you bring it up without verifying it? What do you have to gain? Judd's voice was sharp now, cutting. Is this what your show has become? Trial by anonymous accusation. My show has always been about having real conversations, Andy said, about pushing past the publicity talking points and getting to the truth. The truth. Judd laughed, but there was no humor in it. You don't care about the truth. You care about creating a moment, about going viral, about being able to say you got Judd Apatow to lose his cool on your show. That's not fair, Andy said, but his protest sounded weak, even to his own ears. You want to talk about fair? Judd leaned forward now, his entire posture changing from defensive to aggressive. Fair would have been calling me before the show and saying, hey, I've heard some things, and I want to give you a chance to address them. Fair would have been providing me with actual details so I could respond substantively. This is a hit job, dressed up as an interview. Andy's jaw tightened. A hit job? Judd, I'm asking you questions that people in the industry are asking. I'm giving you a platform to respond. By ambushing me, Judd shot back, there's a difference between tough questions and ambush tactics, and you know it. You've been doing this long enough to know exactly what you're doing right now. What I'm doing, Andy said, his voice taking on a defensive edge, is holding people accountable. You've spent years calling out other people's behavior, other people's mistakes. Why is it so hard for you to answer questions about your own? Because your questions are based on lies, Judd said, and his voice was steady now, controlled anger replacing the initial frustration. You just accused me of making an actress cry. That never happened. So either your source is lying, or they're misremembering, or they're talking about someone else entirely. But you didn't bother to verify it before putting it out there as if it were fact. Andy shifted in his seat. I trust my source. You trust your source more than the person sitting in front of you, Judd asked. More than someone you've known for years, someone whose work you claim to respect. It's not about trust, Andy said. It's about patterns. When multiple people say similar things, there's usually something there. Multiple people, Judd repeated. You keep saying that. How many people? 3, 5, 10. And saying similar things about what? Being demanding, being passionate about my work, because that's very different from the picture you're trying to paint. I think you know it's more than that, Andy said quietly. And I think the reason you're getting so defensive is because part of you knows there's some truth to what I'm saying. The audience gasped. It was a low blow, armchair psychology masquerading as insight. Judd went very still. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. Don't tell me what I know, Andy. Don't sit there and psychoanalyze me based on anonymous gossip. You want to know why I'm defensive? Because you're attacking my reputation, my character, my relationships with people I care about, all based on things you heard from people who won't even put their names behind their accusations. Maybe they won't put their names behind it because they're afraid, Andy suggested, because they know how powerful you are, how connected you are. Or maybe they won't put their names behind it because they know it's not true and they don't want to be held accountable for spreading false information, Judd countered. Have you considered that? Andy leaned forward, his eyes locked on Judd's. I've considered everything. And here's what I keep coming back to. You've built this image of yourself as the good guy, the one who elevates comedy, who gives people chances, who creates this warm, collaborative environment. But what if that's just good PR? What if the reality is more complicated? The reality is always more complicated, Judd said. Making movies is complicated. Working with dozens or hundreds of people with different personalities and different needs is complicated. But complicated doesn't mean toxic. It doesn't mean abusive. And that's what you're implying, whether you want to admit it or not. I'm not implying anything, Andy said. I'm asking direct questions. No, you're making accusations framed as questions, Judd corrected. There's a difference. If you came to me and said, hey, someone told me you yelled at them on set. Can you talk about that specific incident? That would be a question. What you're doing is saying, I heard you're terrible to work with. Defend yourself. That's not journalism. That's a witch hunt. Andy's eyes flashed. A witch hunt. That's a pretty serious accusation, Judd, especially coming from someone who just spent 5 minutes complaining about serious accusations. The difference, Judd said, his voice hard, is that I'm sitting here, on camera, saying it to your face. I'm not hiding behind anonymity. I'm not whispering to some third party and hoping they'll do my dirty work for me. So you're saying everyone who's ever spoken to me about you is a coward? Andy asked. I'm saying that if someone has a problem with me, they should tell me directly, Judd replied. And if they're going to make public accusations, they should be willing to stand behind them publicly. That's basic fairness. That's basic decency. Not everyone has your platform, Andy said. Not everyone has your power. Sometimes people need someone else to ask the questions they can't ask themselves. And sometimes, Judd said, people use other people's platforms to spread rumors they can't substantiate. Sometimes people have axes to grind, or they're jealous, or they misunderstood a situation, or they're just flat out wrong. And when you give voice to those people without verification, without context, you become a weapon for anyone who wants to take someone down. Andy sat back, his expression unreadable. That's a very convenient narrative. Everyone who criticizes you is lying or jealous or has an axe to grind. That's not what I said, Judd replied. I said some people might be, and the way to figure out which is to verify your information, to get specifics, to allow the accused person to actually defend themselves with facts rather than vague denials. You're defending yourself right now, Andy pointed out. Against what? Judd's frustration was boiling over again. You still haven't told me anything specific that I can actually address. You've made vague allegations about yelling, about creating uncomfortable environments, about power dynamics. But where? When with who? What project? What day? Give me something concrete, and I'll give you a concrete answer. All right, Andy said, and there was something dangerous in his tone now. You want concrete? Let's talk about the editing process on your films. I've heard from multiple people that you force actors to do dozens of takes of the same scene, that you shoot for hours and hours until people are exhausted. And then in editing, you sometimes use takes where people look bad, where they're tired or frustrated because you think it's funny. Judd blinked. That's not even close to how it works. Yes, I do a lot of takes. That's part of my process. But I do a lot of takes because I'm trying different things, because I want to give actors room to play, and I would never use footage of someone looking bad because I think it's funny. The whole point is to make them look good, to capture them at their best. But who decides what their best is? Andy pressed. You do. You're the one with final cut. You're the one who decides what the audience sees. That's what a director does, Andy. That's literally the job. But the idea that I'm sitting in an editing bay, cackling over footage of exhausted actors and thinking about how funny they look, that's absurd. That's insulting. And the fact that you would even suggest it shows how far you're willing to go with this. I'm just repeating what I've been told, Andy said. By who? Judd demanded. Give me one name. Just one. Let me talk to this person. Let me understand what actually happened versus what they think happened or what they told you happened. You know I can't do that, Andy said again. Then this conversation is pointless, Judd said. You're going to keep throwing out accusations. I'm going to keep denying them. And we're just going to go in circles because you won't provide any actual evidence or allow any actual dialogue with the people making these claims. Evidence? Andy's voice rose. What kind of evidence do you want? Do you want me to produce a video of you yelling at people? Do you want me to get affidavits? This isn't a court of law, Judd. This is a conversation. This stopped being a conversation a long time ago, Judd said quietly. This is an interrogation, and frankly, I'm done with it. You're done with it. Andy looked genuinely surprised. We're not even halfway through the interview. Then I guess it's going to be a short interview, Judd said, because I'm not going to sit here and continue to defend myself against anonymous accusations that may or may not even be real. The studio went dead silent. Even the crew seemed to be holding their breath. Judd, Andy said, and for the first time there was something almost pleading in his voice. Come on, don't do this. We can move on. We can talk about your new project. We can talk about whatever you want. After you just spent 15 minutes trying to destroy my reputation. Judd shook his head. No, I don't think so. You don't get to do that and then pivot to asking me about my favorite memory from set or whatever softball question you have queued up. I wasn't trying to destroy your reputation, Andy protested. I was asking legitimate questions that people want answered. What people? Judd asked. Who are these people? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you decided to make this a thing, to create this narrative. And now you're trying to justify it by claiming you're speaking for some silent majority of people who have problems with me. Andy's face flushed. That's not fair. Fair. Judd laughed, sharp and bitter. You want to talk to me about fair? After everything you just did? I gave you a chance to respond, Andy said, his voice rising to match Judd's intensity. That's more than most people get. You're a public figure. You've made yourself a public figure. You don't get to hide behind privacy when questions get uncomfortable. There's a difference between uncomfortable questions and character assassination. Judd fired back, and you know it. You've been in this business long enough to know the difference between holding someone accountable and just tearing them down for ratings. For ratings? Andy's eyes widened. You think this is about ratings? What else would it be about? Judd asked. Because it's certainly not about truth. It's not about justice. It's about creating a viral moment. It's about being able to run clips on social media with headlines like, Judd Apatow gets grilled, or Judd Apatow can't handle the heat. That's what this is. That is so insulting, Andy said, and he actually looked hurt. I respect you. I respect your work. That's why I wanted to have this conversation, because I think you're better than the things I've been hearing. Then why didn't you approach it that way? Judd demanded. Why didn't you come at this from a place of genuine concern instead of gotcha questions and anonymous sources? If you really respected me, you would have handled this differently. How? Andy threw his hands up. How would you have wanted me to handle it? Should I have just ignored what people were telling me? Should I have just let it slide because we're friendly? You should have verified it, Judd said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet again. You should have done the basic work of actual journalism. You should have asked yourself whether the accusations were credible, whether they were specific enough to be actionable, Whether there was any evidence beyond hearsay. Sometimes hearsay is all people have, Andy countered. Sometimes people are too scared to go on the record, but their experiences are still valid. Their experiences might be valid, Judd agreed, but that doesn't mean their interpretation of those experiences is accurate. People remember things wrong. People project their own feelings onto situations. People sometimes blame others for things that weren't actually anyone's fault. And when you just accept everything at face value without questioning it, you become a conduit for every grudge, every misunderstanding, every false accusation out there. Andy leaned forward, his expression hardening again. So everyone who has a problem with you is wrong. Everyone who's uncomfortable with your behavior just misunderstood you. Stop putting words in my mouth, Judd said sharply. I'm saying that accusations require evidence. I'm saying that before you destroy someone's reputation, you better be damn sure you're right. I'm saying that anonymous accusations are the lowest form of cowardice, and giving them a platform without verification is irresponsible. I verified them, Andy insisted. I talked to multiple people. I checked the stories. How? Judd challenged. How did you check them? Did you talk to other people who were there? Did you look at production schedules, call sheets, anything concrete? Or did you just talk to a few people who all said variations of the same thing and decide that was good enough? Andy's silence was telling. That's what I thought, Judd said. You heard what you wanted to hear, what fit the narrative you were already building, and you ran with it. That's not true, Andy said, but his voice lacked conviction. Then prove it, Judd said. Show me your evidence. Show me your verification process. Show me anything that suggests you did actual due diligence before deciding to publicly accuse me of abusing actors. I didn't accuse you of abusing anyone, Andy protested. Yes, you did, Judd said flatly. Maybe not in those exact words, but that's what you were implying. Yelling at actresses until they cry. Using footage of exhausted actors because you think it's funny. Creating environments where people are afraid to speak up. What do you call that if not abuse? I call it asking questions, Andy said. But he was clearly rattled now. Questions designed to make me look guilty no matter how I answer them, Judd replied. If I deny them, I'm being defensive. If I explain my process, I'm making excuses. If I get angry, I'm proving that I have a temper. You set up a no-win situation and then acted surprised when I called you out on it. You're twisting this, Andy said. You're making it about me when it's supposed to be about you. It is about you, Judd shot back. It's about your responsibility as someone with a platform. It's about your choice to turn this interview into an ambush. It's about your decision to prioritize getting a dramatic moment over actually getting to the truth. I am trying to get to the truth, Andy insisted. No, you're trying to get a confession, Judd corrected. There's a difference. Truth requires context, nuance, actual investigation. What you want is for me to break down and admit that, yes, I'm terrible to work with, so you can have your moment and feel like you've done something important. Andy's jaw clenched. You know what? Maybe I did come at this the wrong way. Maybe I should have handled it differently. But that doesn't change the fact that people have said these things about you. That doesn't just go away because you don't like how I asked about it. And maybe people have said these things because they know someone like you will repeat them without question, Judd said. Maybe they know that in today's climate, all you have to do is make an accusation and it becomes true in the court of public opinion, regardless of whether there's any actual evidence to support it. That's cynical, Andy said. That's realistic, Judd replied. And the fact that you can't see that you can't see how dangerous it is to give credence to anonymous accusations without verification. That's honestly scary to me. Because you have influence. People trust you. And when you use that trust to spread unverified gossip, you're not being a journalist. You're being a tabloid. The comparison clearly stung. Andy's face flushed red. I am not a tabloid. I've built my career on having real conversations with people, on getting them to open up, on creating a space where honesty is valued. Then be honest with yourself about what this was, Judd said. This wasn't a conversation. This was a prosecution. And I'm not going to sit here and let you prosecute me based on anonymous testimony from people who won't even show their faces. Judd, please, Andy said. And now he really did sound concerned. Can we take a breath here? Can we reset? Reset to what? Judd asked. To, before you accused me of making actresses cry. To, Before you suggested I abuse my power. There's no going back from that, Andy. You said what you said. You showed who you are. And you're showing who you are right now, Andy said, his voice hardening again. Someone who can't handle criticism. Someone who can't take accountability. Accountability for what? Judd's voice rose. You still haven't told me what I'm supposed to be accountable for. You've made vague accusations. You've repeated anonymous gossip. But you haven't presented a single concrete thing that I can actually address. So what exactly am I supposed to be accountable for, Andy? Having a reputation that you decided was worth attacking. I didn't attack you, Andy said. Yes, you did, Judd said. And you know what the worst part is? I came here in good faith. I thought we were going to have a real conversation about comedy, about creativity, about the work. Instead, you decided to make this about tearing me down. And for what? So you can feel like you're doing important work. So you can pretend you're speaking truth to power. I am speaking truth, Andy said weakly. No, Judd said, standing up. You're speaking gossip, and I'm done participating in it. The audience gasped as Judd reached up and removed his microphone. His hands were steady, his movements deliberate. Judd, come on, Andy said, half rising from his own chair. Don't do this. Sit back down. We can work this out. There's nothing to work out, Judd said, his voice calm now, resolved. You made your choice when you decided to turn this interview into an ambush. I'm making mine by refusing to participate any further. You're being dramatic, Andy. Tried, but it sounded desperate. I'm being principled, Judd corrected. There's a difference. You want to accuse me of something? Fine, do it. But don't expect me to sit here and pretend it's a conversation. Don't expect me to play along with this performance. He set the microphone down on his chair and looked directly at Andy. You know, I actually feel sorry for you, because you had a chance to have a real dialogue about something important. You could have talked about power dynamics in Hollywood, about how we can all do better, about the complexity of creative collaboration. Instead, you went for the cheap shot. You went for the moment. And you know what? You got it. Congratulations. Judd, please, Andy said one more time, but there was no conviction in it anymore. He knew it was over. Goodbye, Andy, Judd said. And then he walked off the set. The silence that followed was deafening. Andy sat there, stunned, staring at the empty chair across from him. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay quiet. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of Andy's discomfort, his realization that he'd pushed too far. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, Andy finally spoke. Well, I guess we're going to take a commercial break. And that's exactly why we can't stop talking about it. So make sure you subscribe to stay updated on all the latest stories like this, and drop a comment below.